Sunday Baroque Conversations is made possible by the Friends of Sunday Baroque and is produced at WSHU Public Radio in Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm Suzanne Bona. Thank you for listening. Don't miss an episode of Sunday Baroque Conversations. Subscribe on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review. If you want to find out where you can listen to our weekly show, visit our website, sundaybaroque.org, for a station list and our 24/7 stream. Again, that's sundaybaroque.org. Founded in 2018 by cellist Jules Biber, soprano Danielle Buonaiuto, baritone Brian Mummert, and cellist Andrew Yee, ChamberQUEER is a collective of performers, composers, and creators. The organization strives to be a concert promoter and an advocacy group. 3 of the 4 founders of ChamberQUEER, Jules, Danielle, and Brian, join me on Zoom to talk about their work. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
So I would love for each of you, and you can decide who goes first, to talk about how you started in music. You know, how old were you, and why did you start in music? You know, sometimes kids start in music because mom or dad wants them to do that, and sometimes you just seek it out. You know, so I'd love to know how each of you sort of got the bug for playing music.
I guess I'll go first.
Okay.
So I actually grew up in Boston, so not too far from you. A little outside of Boston, actually, Brookline, Mass. And I was supposed to start on piano. Me and my sister, my dad was really interested in having us play piano, which I kind of wish I had started on. But it didn't work out with the piano teacher. And it turns out I had been exploring the attic, and there was an old cello up there that I kept like going up and visiting at various times. And my dad asked me if I didn't want to play piano, did I want to play anything else? So I said, well, what's that thing in the attic? And it sort of went from there. And I had a wonderful teacher in Boston that I started with, and I haven't stopped.
Wow. At what point did you sort of know, that music is your thing, or did it just sort of happen?
I honestly think it was when I was, I went to a lot of music camps when I was a kid. I started when I was 8. So for a string player, actually a little bit late compared to many people. And I was at music camp somewhere in, where was it? It was in, I think, Vermont. And I played chamber music that whole summer. And I was so excited about it. And I had never done it before. And I thought it was so fun that you got to like play music with your friends and just like have a conversation. And it kind of clicked for me. So I started to really think about, I could do this for a job. That would be so much fun. And that's when creative fire was sort of lit for me, was playing chamber music at camp.
Okay, cool. Brian, why don't you go? I'm going to just pick.
Okay. So I started off as a pianist. I'm from Connecticut, actually. I'm from Lyme. So I started on piano when I was, I believe, 5, when my parents noticed that when I would go and bang on the piano, I was not so much banging as teaching myself to play things that I'd heard on the radio.
Wow.
So that was sort of step 1 in my musical journey. I kept playing throughout elementary and high school, started singing in high school as well, and sort of made the pivot to being primarily a vocalist over the course of college. I did my undergrad at Yale. I was music director of the Whiffenpoofs, which actually was one of the things that convinced me that, like, this is choral music in particular is a thing that I really want to spend my life doing. I was singing with a lot of the ensembles at Yale, and there's something about the collective experience that I'm sure Jules can relate to, also sort of finding this moment in chamber music where you're in musical conversation with your colleagues and you're sort of collectively creating something that's more than the sum of its parts. And that feeling absolutely hooked me. And that's sort of one of the moments when I was like, I need to try pursuing this professionally and see what happens.
Wow, that's great. All right, Danielle, your turn.
Well, similar vibe here. It's definitely the social aspect, the community aspect. that lit the fire for me as well. And I sort of came to music organically through my experiences in community theater in high school. So I was really, really involved, like deeply involved in community theater in high school. And I also went to an arts high school, Unionville High School, just outside of Toronto, where I'm from. And it was a great program. It was a public high school with an arts program sort of within the public school. So we took all the normal classes, but we had musical, dramatic, or dance or visual art electives. And I was actually there for drama. And so I feel like I've had a very well-rounded education as a singer, in that I started in theater. So I kind of had that stagecraft and storytelling thing as the sort of seed of my interest in being on the stage and singing, telling musical stories, basically. But singing was super fun in choir, and that's kind of the thing, was being in that big group, making a big sound together. I was kind of teaching myself to read music along the way, just so I could keep participating in all the ensembles. I wanted to be a part of the concert choir, the jazz ensemble. I wanted to keep doing musical theater roles, and that was a big incentive for me, was just, to keep participating in these environments where I just felt so welcomed and like I belonged and I had friends. And it sort of organically was a way to realize that maybe the talent I wanted to cultivate, and maybe that I wanted to continue pursuing university, was actually voice. And at university, I got very interested in contemporary music. It sort of scratched a different itch for me. There was still a lot of ensemble music making, doing contemporary music, doing new music by the composers who I was going to school with. That sort of also lent itself really well to being part of that sort of social collaboration atmosphere, that the composers were in the room and we were dialoguing about the music. That was really interesting to me, as well as the idea that the music was very relevant to the things we were thinking about. That sort of became an important thing to me at that time as well. So a bit of a circuitous path, but
and you ended up where you were meant to be. So these are great stories, and they're actually they're wonderfully unique, but they're also in some ways sort of a very common thread for a lot of people who are passionate about music and who pursue it as a career. I would love for each of you, since your organization is ChamberQUEER, I'd love for you to talk about, like, did queerness figure directly into your formative years as musicians at all, either positive or negative ways? And how did you build on that, and how did you work with that?
I guess I'll go first. That's a really great question, and I think for sure queerness has played a huge role, and I didn't quite. So I should say, I've always been, even as a kid, like I was a tomboy, as people say, and I did a lot of things that typical boys would be doing. I didn't dress like a typical little girl. So from the get-go, concert dress became a point of contention for me, even from very early recitals. And I would be fighting with my mom because the dress code was a certain way. Girls wear this, boys wear this. And so even though I loved this thing that I was doing so much, it was sort of like, oh, but then there's this part of it that doesn't feel like me either. So, and I continued to grapple with that throughout school, undergrad in New York, at Mannes, and even at Cleveland Institute of Music, where I went to grad school. And then throughout my early career as well, doing gigs, because I played, as a freelancer, you do lots of different things. And when I got to New York for my undergrad when I was, 18, I pretty immediately was like, okay, there's a part of me that I am not able to fully be myself in this. And I need to go explore other things. And sort of, I came out when I was 18, so I need to go explore this other side of me, what felt like another side of me. And so I became like a professional lesbian in New York City for a couple of years, and found actually the lesbian folk community, as you do. And I got really into accompanying. I made lots of friends, many of whom were musicians, but not classical musicians. Some of whom were, but a lot of who weren't. And I started to accompany people and play on people's albums and make up music. I'd never written anything or made something up on the spot. So I started to do a lot more of that. And then at the same time, I was going to school and being this, typical classical musician training, like practicing many hours a day and like playing an orchestra, playing chamber music, all these things, which I also really enjoyed. So for many years, it felt like, okay, I'm going to do both of these things separately. And it really wasn't until, the first thing I think I did that sort of wanted to integrate these two selves of mine was to start a little series just at a bar in the back of this bar in Brooklyn. It's called Pete's Candy Store. And I would just invite my friends to come play. And then if they were working on a piece, they had a concert coming up and they just wanted to try things out, I would say, yeah, come by. I have this once a month, just can do whatever I want sort of thing. Sort of paid in drinks. You get 2 drink tickets and you can play whatever you want. And people were like, great. So in a sense, that was sort of queering my life a little bit and inviting people who did similar things to me to come and just be themselves, even if those people were straight, no matter who they were. It didn't have to be gay people, right? And I think I was cultivating, I didn't know at the time, but I really was cultivating a queer space. And and then that sort of, I did that for many years and it was really casual. People loved to come play. People did their grad recitals at the bar instead of at the school, if that was allowed. And so I think, everyone enjoyed that. So I that really sort of got me thinking that these two sides of myself didn't have to be two sides. They could just be, I could be me. And that was really exciting.
Wow. And I love that, as a musician, and I'm a classical flute player. So I totally get it. Like you're in this like track and like this is what you do. Even Yo-Yo Ma has talked about how it was really scary for him when they started doing the Silk Road Journeys stuff because he was like, I don't improvise. I play what's on the page, and so like we're so conditioned for that. And how fascinating that this personal aspect of your life opened you up to so much more of a rich musical experience. That's amazing.
It's so true. I really think I say being queer has been like a really positive thing. Like I have learned so much that I might not have and explored so many things about myself that I might not have. Not to say that straight people don't do this, but like I do feel like it's led me in directions in my life that are so exciting and interesting and like just I'll be exploring, for years to come. And it's just, it's a gift, I think, for me.
That's awesome. All right. Who wants to go next?
So I came out when I was 18, which is right before I started college. I think there's a stereotype that is not necessarily untrue that, little boys who wind up in musical theater and classical music are assumed to be of a certain persuasion. It turned out to be true in my particular case.
What?
I know, shocking. I think there is some pressure when you're a kid, and particularly when you're sort of a preteen and teenager, to like not only be that person, if you haven't figured out how to come out yet. I think that this has changed a lot over the last 20 years, which is really positive, but there's still a long way to go. But I did feel a good amount of pressure to like sort of perform athleticism, perform straightness in various ways. So part of what happened when I came out was being drawn to early music, Baroque music, Renaissance music, and lots of new music, just like Danielle. Not only was this a way for me to be singing music that I felt like fit my voice better, but it also was a musical space where I felt like there was more room for experimentation and improvisation and self-expression, particularly compared to sort of the standard opera track for singers. As a baritone in particular, a lot of the characters that you wind up playing are entitled misogynistic a-holes, if you can say that on this particular podcast. And I don't know, I never felt particularly connected to those characters, even though I did a lot of singing of them in college and grad school. And so being a concert music specialist, being a chamber ensemble specialist gave me an opportunity to sing music that I felt like I could find a more authentic connection to and didn't have to like put on a suit of heterosexuality to be able to perform. Um, I also think that being gay was one of the reasons that I wound up exploring a variety of musical styles. So particularly right after undergrad, I moved to New York and was sort of starting to do classical music, but was also doing a handful of backup singing gigs and did a couple studio sessions for folk musicians. And I think the sort of inter-stylistic experimentation that I've done and try to continue to do um, is something that I stumbled upon because I realized, oh, you know, being gay, you're sort of put outside of a box of social norms by default. And so then you get to turn to other parts of your life and go, oh, like, what are the other boxes that I've automatically put myself in that I can bust out of? And so I think that's definitely one of them for me, is sort of like living outside of strictly the classical music canon.
So we've got two so far with the folk music influence.
It happens
Pop
when
music,
you're gay. It's
you know.
like you're
Right.
gonna hit the folk music scene at some point.
Right. And it's just another form of chamber music, actually. But
Yes,
but
Absolutely.
so Danielle, your turn now. Let's see. Let's hear your personal path.
yeah. Well, by the time I got to university, I was pretty serious about the whole. I saw the pipeline and I was like, I'm doing that. So it felt like a bit of a straight and narrow path to a career in opera. And that was interesting to me. I was finding that I really liked it. I liked being on stage. I liked opera as a genre. I still do. Like, I am such an opera fan. Hey, hi. You see my sweatshirt. But it is a fairly, I mean, Brian spoke a little to this, the Fach system, the system by which we categorize voice types, also categorizes things like temperament and character. The types of roles you sing don't just have to do with range, it has to do with type of person, really. And the operatic canon is, while there are many stories that are sort of expansive in it, the typing of voices tends to be it tends to be a pigeonholing mechanism. And so as a soprano who has a high, lighter voice that moves, like a light lyric color to her voice, there are a lot of soubrette roles that I would be right for, a lot of ingenue roles, not a lot of room for an expansive definition of femininity. And that sort of weirdly transfers onto the person carrying the voice. It shouldn't, because we can put costumes and wigs on, no problem. We're taught to move around on stage and inhabit different physicalities. That shouldn't really be an issue. But I feel like, and this is changing, but there was a bit of a lack of imagination around, you know, who was in front of an audition panel and what they were going to be able to do based on how they looked and sounded. And that sort of drove home a number of other sort of normative practices of opera. The spaces themselves are very gendered. Like, we have gendered dressing rooms. We have the ladies and gentlemen of the chorus. We have like a very sort of, I don't know. I guess this is the way we've always done it kind of thing that many of us are now cheerfully and insistently working to change. But that was sort of the tension I felt was, I don't know if I'm the opposite of what this is, but I'm not just this, and it's not comfortable, and I'm not auditioning at my best. I don't feel my best. I'm not singing my best. I feel restricted in my body. And I didn't really understand what that was about for a long time. And I'm not saying, you know, that sort of relaxing into a more authentic self-expression or coming to terms with some of the things that were, you know, happening with me that there wasn't really room for. I'm not saying that those puzzle pieces falling into place fixes everything. But I definitely just found my way into a more, a career path that felt more authentic. So I'm not necessarily pursuing a solo career in opera, though solo work does come my way. It's almost always, hey, do you want to play this robot or spirit or person from the distant future. Like there's almost always something that's a little outside the operatic Fachbox, and it's almost always new opera, which I celebrate because there's room for lots of different expressions and lots of different narratives these days on stages in the States, in Canada, seeing a lot of that in Canada. And I love that. It would be so cool if we could start to see like new dramaturgy in the canon itself. That is happening in certain ways, but it's a bit slower to happen, but I'm very optimistic. Anyway, the sort of porosity of my career has been across classical genres, really. So I find that if I'm self-presenting a recital or I'm doing chamber music with folks like this, it's very freeing because there isn't that story to have to tell with my voice and body, right? And so that has been a milieu that I've gravitated towards, even as I'm still cultivating my career in opera. Yeah, and so it's sort of been. I haven't quite hit the folk stage of my.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
But it's coming.
I made you sing some Dolly Parton, to be fair.
That's true. That's true. We have dabbled together collectively. Yeah.
There you go. I want to hear that. So you've come together with this organization, ChamberQUEER, and I looked at your website, and I'm just going to sort of throw out, just so people listening can kind of understand. ChamberQUEER highlights LGBTQ plus voices in contemporary and historical music and reimagines the classical concert experience as a radically inclusive gathering space and musical community for the 21st century. It's a lot there. And it's a lot of good stuff. And so I would love for maybe each of you can kind of take a little chunk of that and explain what you mean by that and how you express that with the activities and the people that you engage with.
I'll tackle the sort of first part of our mission,
okay.
Which is thinking about recontextualizing a variety of different kinds of music. It's particularly fitting that we're talking to Sunday Baroque, in fact, because a lot of what we do is thinking about and recontextualizing early music in a variety of ways. Mm-hmm. We have a series that we've done twice now that we call BaroqueQueer, which happened twice in 2023, and there's maybe some plotting about 2025 in the works. Follow us on Instagram or join our mailing list at chamberqueer.org to find out more about that. But we are trying to think about what historically informed performance means, right? We're all experienced in early music and in that particular tradition of sort of going back and looking at treatises to learn about techniques and phrasing and how text was pronounced and all these sort of new things that have led to the revitalization of early music over the last half century at this point. But we like to ask the question, whose history is this that we're telling, right? So what does historically informed performance mean if the history that you're telling is like the history of a group of queer musicians in the 1980s downtown, and how were they playing and thinking about Bach and Beethoven and all these other sort of pillars of the canon. So that's one way that we try to reimagine what it means. That results in a lot of different things, including playing new music on Baroque instruments, playing Baroque music that we've rearranged for new combinations of instruments or on modern instruments, or on electric guitar. It's really about putting works that have thematic things to say to each other in conversation. For example, we did a program all about dance music, which is such a common theme in Baroque music, but we also included a piece by Julius Eastman, which was inspired by disco and the sort of evolution of 70s and 80s dance music. And we included a couple of tangos. And so it was a much more expansive idea of what dance music could be than the sort of typical forms that you see in, say, a Baroque suite.
I love that too, because I guess, and this is sort of a thing I've always, wondered about, and I ask a lot of musicians that I speak with when I'm interviewing people. But we have sort of segmented music into these little slices, and it's sort of like, well, if it's Baroque, then it's not really classical music, and if it's if it's classical, it can't be folk. And, like it's as though there's some sort of divide between musical genres. It seems to me that they're somewhat arbitrary, because there is a lot of overlap. You just gave some really good examples. I mean, I kind of feel like when it really all is said and done, music is music, and yeah, there might be certain characteristics that are more typical, improvisation in jazz, let's say, or certain kinds of chords and harmonies and melodies and things like that, certainly. But does that really make them a completely different animal? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think more and more there are sort of composer performers that locate themselves in or next to classical music that are really playing with this as well. Caroline Shaw springs immediately to mind. Steely, who is the frontman for Nickel Creek and for Punch Brothers, but has also done a bunch of composition for Carnegie Hall, is another person who seems to do this a lot. There are lots of people doing improvisational work that overlaps in a variety of ways. People like Maz Swift, who is a frequent ChamberQUEER collaborator, but also plays with Silk Road, and does a lot of sort of crossover combination of genres and styles through improvisation. There are a lot of people who are sort of living at this intersection. It's not just us, but we like living there too.
Yeah.
Actually, Maz is a friend of mine that we've been friends for many, many years. And this was when I was still really in my sort of classical tunnel, just, one path. And Maz was someone that I met playing chamber music, actually. And really was sort of turned on. Speaking of light bulbs, they really turned a light bulb on for me. I was like, this is a person that went to Juilliard, is an incredible, classical musician, but does this whole other thing that they just they do their own thing. They're not afraid to kind of experiment and improvise and, challenge norms. They're really into, Irish music as well. And that really, they were someone that's really inspired me over the years. And I'm, again, in music, you find all these wonderful people that inspire you and you play music with them, but then they do something else that's interesting to you. So you start exploring that. So it's really just it's such a vibrant community. And I was also wanted to say the idea of sort of composer performer, I know for my whole undergrad, it was sort of the idea you do one thing, either you improvise and you do this type of music, or you do, you just read the notes and you play this kind of music. And I think, speaking of Baroque music, that was super not the case, as we all know, right? It was very much, think people like Boccherini, think of all these composer performers. And it just astounds me that for so many years we thought differently. Somehow that changed after Beethoven, where it was nope, we're just going to play the written music. And I love to see all these composers today and performers just being I can do both. And I'm a performer and I played all this music, and realizing because of that, you have such a wealth of information about how to write music, what you like, what you don't like. It's actually really interesting because we did our last June ChamberQUEER Festival 2023 called We Refract. We got a bunch of composers and performers, people who do both from various genres. And we each composed sort of our own piece, or the starts of our own piece, and we got together and workshopped it. And from the pieces that we each individually wrote, we made a whole tapestry of music, evening length music. And when we were proposing this, Brian, I think it was Brian, who was like, do we want to compose, and any of us? And I surprised myself by saying yes. And I was and then I freaked out about it for about the whole year. I procrastinated like crazy. And then I just, and I was going into this place where, I don't know how to use these computer programs. I don't know how to, write counterpoint. I can't do this, but then I sort of just let myself, go and think about what I was inspired by. And I ended up writing a piece that I really loved. And I want to continue writing. So kind of dipped my toe.
This kind of segues well into this other part of our mission, which is about creating radically inclusive community for everyone. It's about creating that space that we have experienced in various ways, but not always in our classical music educational environments or workspaces, where we can just relax and be ourselves, be our full selves, maybe even discover parts of ourselves that we weren't sure were there, or, that were laying latent. or that just come to life because of the relationships that we're in these spaces. That has been such a driving force for all of our musical collaborations, all of the community events that we run. It's central to our mission, and it's the thing we do. And all the other things are in that thing. And so this collaborative composition that you're describing is an example of how that shows up in performance for us. How we say, what is it you're curious about right now? What is it you're passionate about right now? What kind of music do you want to write? And that's shaped by maybe a very broad prompt. That year, we were thinking about our relationships. We were thinking about how the personal and the musical relationships that we have in our lives overlap or don't, our intention. People came at that from a variety of angles, which was the hope, so that we had a really fulsome story to tell as a group at the end. And we fostered that space of trust between people that didn't know each other well or at all, by having a sort of workshop week in the spring before they all got together in June to put the piece together over the course of a week, so that there was time built in for that trust to build, for that rapport to grow, to share meals together, right? To have this sort of the network of support kind of built in these two ways, musically as well as personally. And we that's really important to us. And we find that is feedback we get from the people who come to collaborate with us, is that that's not really a part of their working environments in other places. And it's so easy to do, and it makes such a difference. So that's been something that's really important. It's been a way that we've also examined perhaps how some of these conventions, in fact, they're made up. Maybe if they're not working, we don't need to do them. That's something that's very typical of queer spaces that are, just in general, any kind of community organization organized around queer values is thinking about how they're pushing back against a hierarchical or top-down model, for example. And that's something we're thinking about as well within our own ranks. How, having a voice, having each person sort of be in charge of showing up and expressing an opinion, their subjectivity, their own story, how that isn't always the case in a lot of musical environments. That's very important to us as well. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I think as queer people, we're so used to making community and needing to. It's sort of like not an option not to want to make community, because a lot of us are not accepted by our families, and a lot of us are not accepted in the field that we choose to pursue for work. So it's like the idea of cultivating community is something that's very intrinsic, I think, to many queer people. I would say most, just because we have to do it all the time. So what a great thing to be able to bring this to the classical music sort of world, and create this space. And I think, for this project, we did hire queer people for it. So I think it was a really organic process to work through together. And I hope lots of organizations are able to sort of follow suit and build these kind of processes into the work that they do, because I think it's not something that is prioritized in a lot of productions. The idea of making people feel safe, feel seen, feel wanted, respected. And I think there is work that you need to put into that at the beginning of any project, whether it's music that's written, whether it's music you're making up or improvising. I think it's really important, and it doesn't take a lot of time. I think, there's little things you can do to help people feel comfortable. And I'm not just talking about queer people, I'm talking about everyone.
That's the thing, I think. Yeah. And just to sort of put close the loop on that, is that basically a space in which everyone feels welcome means that everyone feels welcome, right? So this is not just, an improvement we make to our practices improves it for everybody. And so this is something we've seen over and over again there's a big DEI push right now in the arts, right? And when it's done right, when it's done with the intention to really improve things for people in their workplaces or their educational environments, we see that everybody can put their shoulders down a little more, right? It's not just about a group that that is being sort of focused on only receiving benefit from that. It makes it better for everybody.
Right.
And our spaces are, of course, they're run by queer people. It's a queer space, but that means it is inclusive. That means it is open to all, and it makes space for everybody.
Yeah,
So,
and I think, you raise a really good point. And chamber music is so dependent on, having that rapport, having literally that communication on stage, and it is, it only makes sense. It means that the final product is better. But that leads me to my next question really quite beautifully, because what I want to know is, and maybe you each have stories of this, or maybe you don't each have stories, but I would love, we know now how the musicians are included in this, but I'd love to know, do you have any stories about how you've touched the lives of your audiences?
We got some good ones.
Bet.
Go ahead.
You're on, Brian.
No, you go first.
Okay, cool. Can I tell the story of our first workshop?
Yes.
Okay, so when we began, we were a group of 4 co-founders. We got together for lunch. We said, what do we think the problems are that we want to be solving? What are the things we want this thing we're doing to do? We found some intersections, very general things we thought we might like to try. Some of the things we've been talking about, in fact, that have become part of our ongoing practice. Like, we want at least one moment where everyone's participating in the music making, that kind of thing. And we said, we should probably just have a workshop and try a bunch of stuff. Let's see how it goes. So by that time, Jules was running.
So my series had switched places. Yeah.
Jules is running the festival out of Branded Saloon in Brooklyn, which is a de facto gay bar in Prospect Heights. And they were happy to host in their back room. Just, got a little stage and some tables and a long hallway to enter it, and some stairs to go downstairs to a second room. The room itself was full. The staircase was full. The back hallway was full.
Wow.
We really had not done a lot of marketing. We posted on Facebook, Instagram. We told some people. Of course, everybody who participated in the workshop told their friends. But really, it was like, oh, nobody's doing this, and people want it. That place was packed to the rafters. People couldn't get in the room,
It was crazy.
They had to listen from the front bar, It was just, we had no idea. We just really had no idea. And we weren't doing anything really what we thought, was really out of the box, like super radical. We were just intentionally making a queer space, doing music in a queer space in our own way, trying some things intentionally, like using a Pauline Oliveros sound meditation to make sure everybody had a chance to participate together. So we were kind of breaking that performer audience boundary a little bit. We did some things by queer composers, but very, we did some Schubert. We did some local composers, like a piece by Eve Buglerian. And so we were already trying a little bit of the past present dialoguing, seeing where maybe some of those connections and intersections arose from hearing music side by side, but it was not super developed at that time. But we had people come up and say, I didn't realize how much I needed this. I've been waiting for something like this for 20 years. Thank you so much. This means so much to me. This means the world to me. We've had people join ChamberQUEER as artists or come as audience members who later find that they have the community they need to come out, even late in life. Like it's been very transformative for a lot of folks. And we have audiences, people bring their kids, people who are classical music patrons, people who are queer people who have never gone to a classical concert. So it's really also given people a chance to try something new, enjoy things with their family. It's opened some boundaries, I think, there too.
Yeah, I just want to sort of accentuate that point, that this has brought in people who wouldn't normally listen to classical music because, it's so stuffy and I already deal with so much, pushback about my identity. This is not the genre of music for me. And I think it's really invited a lot of people in who wouldn't normally be here. And it's so nice to have them. And that it was just such a magical night. And we were like, okay, we're on the right path.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
I think for me, some of the most magical moments of interaction with quote unquote our audience are moments when they're not in fact our audience, but are in fact collaborators or members of our community in some way. So that happens in a few ways. Danielle mentioned some of the Pauline Oliveros and other sound meditations that we do, where we encourage the audience to make music with us, and that sort of breaks down this barrier early in a concert. But also we do a lot of community events and a lot of community organizing. One of my particular favorite memories of this was right before the pandemic. We did composer-performer speed dating, which was just let anyone who has written music or anyone who wants to play some new music show up, and we'll take a few minutes and encourage conversations, and I'll go around a big circle and just have the opportunity for, of course, we're an intentionally queer space, so there were lots of queer people there, but there were lots of non-queer people there as well. And it was just this great opportunity for people who are interested in making new kinds of music within classical music to get to know each other. And the number of people who came up after me and said, or the number of people who since have said, oh, I met somebody at that event, and now we're working on this piece together, or now we're playing this concert together. Seeing those kind of connections formed through the work that we do is one of the most powerful things for me.
And we also do things like reading parties, just getting people together, in various locations. One time we had one hosted in Central Park, and people just came, brought their instruments, threw up some music stands, and played some music together. And so we feel like these community events, while we put on these sort of curated shows that take a lot of planning, we also are really equally, if not more, committed to creating these community spaces where people can just show up in a casual way and make connections and make music, and whatever level you're at. It doesn't have to be this sort of high level music making all the time. While we love to do that, and that's a big part of what we do, it's really these community spaces that we cultivate that I think are the thing that I'm the most passionate about. Because I see the change that it brings in people, and the comfort it brings people.
Well, I have been speaking on Zoom with cellist Jules Biber, soprano Danielle Buonaiuto, and baritone Brian Mummert, 3 of the 4 founding members of ChamberQUEER, about their lives in music. Thank you so much. This has been really terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.